And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is my friend John Tota. John has established himself as a pioneer in online education for corporate training. He began his career on Wall Street in sales and technology positions at Payne Weber and UBS. And then in 2002, he founded a company called Edulence, whose focus is developing online training solutions for corporate educators. He then launched a subsidiary of that firm called Knowledge Link, which is connecting great experts to people that want to learn from those experts. So John's been in this space. He's been in online learning since sort of before it was known as online learning. So he's got a lot to share, and he's a fellow part-time New Yorker, although I'm a full-time New Yorker. But thanks for coming on board, John.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Okay, so 2002, you decide to dive into this sort of corporate online education space. And just to sort of set the table, back in those days, e-learning was going to take over the world. We were never going to learn in person again, and it would take you 9 hours to download what was in essence a PowerPoint that you hit next on. So, right? Is that sort of a
Yeah,
fair?
that's about accurate state of the technology in 2002.
And fast forward a couple of weeks, right, or a couple of decades. Where is it at? So, tell me what are the big trends in online learning, and talk about it from sort of the buy side and the sell side. What do the clients want, and what do authors and thought leaders and speakers need to understand to win?
Yeah, so as you know, I've worked on kind of both sides of the industry for almost my entire career. And we run large scale online universities powered by our technology for a lot of players in the financial services space, as well as some other verticals, but a lot of banks, insurance companies, investment firms. And they're kind of the ones looking to purchase content all the time. And then, of course, we love working with the thought leaders who are producing that great content. And I think to your point, probably what's changed the most since when we first got started is just the availability of bandwidth and the fact that you can have such more robust content, more interactive content that can play in virtually every situation on every type of device, and even when somebody's walking on the street or in a car, which just makes it that much more available, now that you can do it with a cell connection on a phone.
Sure.
That's taken it to that. And I think what that's really led us to is a lot more just in time training that's very much focused on a specific need at a specific time, more micro learning as opposed to the
So
45
so
minute.
let's yeah, let's touch on that because there's a lot in there, right? So the bandwidth actually leads to mobile because in 2002, I think my cell phone weighed 9 pounds, right? So it wasn't really a mobile learning device. Now, the guy next to you or the gal next to you standing at Starbucks is probably watching something that might have an educational element to it. So it's always on all the time, mobile. This on-demand piece, I want to touch on that because I think that's a critical piece. In back in the Stone Ages, when you and I were in school, most adult education or corporate education was push. Here's all the things John might need to know as an X, whatever X might be. Let's just stick the hose in his ear and stick him in class for 3 weeks and he'll learn it. And then we'll put him out in the field. Talk about the sort of the short burst and the pull. Like, so tomorrow I need to have a difficult conversation with an employee. I need to pull something down that tells me how to do that. Tell me about sort of the how that cadence has changed things.
Yeah, and so what we've seen now is that, again, this just-in-time micro learning, where it's very specific to things that you're going through in your business or your career at a particular moment. What's, I think, been a big turning point for us and from a tech perspective is that now these learning systems are integrated to personnel systems. So when you get a new job, you get promoted to a manager, you can be auto assigned a curriculum of content that you can consume at home on your device. You're going in to have a difficult conversation with someone who you now manage, and you've got it on your phone and you can watch it. So I think that availability, the instant availability, and the fact that you have these triggers now because we're so integrated with everything else that a company is tracking about an individual, that you can serve up content to their phone at the moment that they need it most.
Yep, and need it meaning because there's an application that they know. Again, tomorrow I need to have that conversation, or I've got to sell that new product, and I'm not really that familiar with it, or whatever the it is. It's connected to a real life event, not a theoretical. At some point, this may happen.
Yeah, and like you said too, this fire hose of content. Back when we first did this, early 2000s, that was the goal. It was like, okay, let's build a library that's got 1,000 titles in it. And when someone comes in, they're just overwhelmed by all this content. And today, that's become the biggest issue is that I don't know where to go. I need to be pointed to the 20 sessions that I really need at this moment in my career, not the fire hose of content like everyone used to do.
Right. So I mean, we're living, I think, in the first time period where information is at excess, right? There's an abundance of information now where we all sort of were trained in the scarcity piece, right, of information. So now the value comes to give me what I want at the right time, at the right moment, because I don't have time to spend days and days and days and days wading through whatever to serve up the thing that I need. I will trust a partner that gives me what I need in the format I need it when I need it, which is really sort of a totally different play for the learning function inside of a large corporation.
Yeah, and what we say now is that there was a time when the value when you're a content provider, so if you're a thought leader, a professional speaker, author, someone who's delivering content now in these formats, there was a time when you were judged by how many views, how many videos do you have, how many
Right.
logins are we getting and views are we getting? And now we like to shift that and say, no, it's not about did 50% or 30% of our population actually log in and look at it? But when you look at that 30%, did they get better in the skill sets that they were
Uh,
weakest at?
Now it's the ROI and the measuring impact, which is a whole
Yeah.
different conversation, right? So I agree with you. It used to be like, wait a minute, only 22% of my people, took that class. Okay, well, that's an argument to say that the class isn't working. But now that you can say, but wait, it may only be 10%, but look at how much better that 10% that took that negotiation skills program did over some period of time post, and say, wow, what's your ROI on that? My people are closing better, faster, more profitable deals, whatever the KPI might be.
Yeah, and that's where like I'm on my soapbox lately about skills-based training because
Yep.
I feel like we helped create that because we got into this space so early that it was like, "Oh, how many views did you get? Did you get 10,000 views this week? 15,000?" Well, it's always going to pale in comparison to the 100 million views a YouTuber's getting, right? So like it's never going to look that good anyway, and you're always up against this wall when you're selling content to these big buyers that they're going to look at and say, well, only 20% showed up, only 30% showed up. And you, as the content provider, can't really do much about that because some people just never engage. But like you said, I love this model of saying, hey, our business case is really based on if those 20%, 30%, the 1,000 people who actually did show up and do it, we did assessments at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, and we know that they actually got better in the areas they needed to get better at. And that's now I feel like that's the way you have to go as a content provider because there's so much noise out there. Everybody's got an online course, you know?
Well, and you're not gonna compete with a Kardashian, right? So, like,
Right.
why bother? And it's not the right metric. So, I wanna touch on another area that I think a lot of authors and thought leaders and content creators struggle with, not partly from a lack of understanding, right? So the typical thing that you see, or I see, and you might see something similar, John, is, okay, so I'm a great speaker, I speak a lot, right? And it always ends, and I know I do well, and I my feedback is good, and I get applause, and okay, cool. And then I've got clients that say, hey, Peter, you were great on stage, how about you do a workshop? And in my mind I go, well, that's sort of like a long speech, so if I can do an hour, I can do three, and I can think of an activity or whatever. And then they keep going along that path. And then we start to work with them and we say, yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but we need to talk about learning efficacy. We need to talk about the art and science of instructional design. We need to talk about the impact that the content's going to have. And it's not that you don't intend to have it when you go from sort of the speech at an hour to the workshop to 3 hours, but you're not versed in this domain. So, can you talk about the importance of sort of the invisible value of instructional design and all the things that are inputs into creating a great piece of learning content?
I think that it's can't at this stage of the game, I don't think you can value it enough because it's everybody is throwing out videos on YouTube or any number of platforms out there and they're not using proper instructional design. They're not hiring the people who can turn it into a true learning program. And yet, people are replacing traditional learning, whether it's in a live format, workshop, in person, anything that they might have done traditionally. Now they're replacing it with what they're buying from content providers. And yet, not enough people are really investing the time in instructional design, the interaction, the like you said, knowing that you're really transferring proper knowledge and skills are being learned, as opposed to just, hey, I got 50 really cool videos with great motion graphics and nice backgrounds.
Yep. And again, if you're not trained in this, you're not going to know it. And you might even be putting stuff out that people like. But I always say, sort of, the bar at the enterprise level is really starts with the quality of the learning frameworks and the instructional design and the interactivity and the ability to ultimately, where we had the conversation a couple of minutes ago, measure the efficacy. And it's, it's like swimming with an anchor if you don't go there. What are the other things? I sort of went down the ID path here, but what are the other things that I should be thinking about if I'm ready to dive in? Right. So I'm, again, author, thought leader, speaker, content person, and I want to dive into the corporate space at scale. What are the Give me the sort of 3 to 5 things I should be thinking about.
So what I start with a lot of our clients is thinking very much about not necessarily the clients, the corporate clients that you have relationships with that you want to take your content to, but drill it down one step further to the roles within that company that you're going to serve. Because what I think happens in a lot of cases is that we get very focused on the customer being that big brand name corporate client, but the customer really is not the buyer at the chief learning officer, chief marketing officer, whoever the head of training might be. They're buying it, and yes, they are paying for it out of their budget, and they control the purse strings. But ultimately, your success is determined with these end users, and I think.
Wait. So, but let me split that because I agree 1,000%. You actually, it's not binary. You have two masters to serve. So during the buying process and the customer process, it might be that CLO, it might be that HR person, it might be that training buyer, and they're looking for a whole bunch of stuff, and you have to satisfy their needs, right? But where you're going now is, how do you serve the needs of the user, who's probably not funding it directly with their own dollars, right? Different market.
Right, exactly right.
Different constituent, actually, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And you do. You have two masters. In the early stage, it's you got to show, hey, this is what the ROI could be on this. This is how we're going to use the budget. This is what you get out of it. And then you shift modes once you get that signed deal and now they're going to
Right.
start delivering. Now it's like, okay, how do we go one step further to make sure that everybody who's touching this content, the end users now, the employees of that company, are actually getting better because they're using it. And there's a lot of touch points there. I think it's sometimes easy to say, okay, we got the sale, let's move on to the next one. But this is it's a novelty business. We see a lot. We're starting now to see attrition in the content libraries that we didn't see 5 years ago
Okay.
because it was so new. But now there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of content out there. The novelty's worn off, and so at the end of the day, the ROI is going to come because those end users engaged and they got better. And I feel like I always like to see people doing some kind of old school touch points with those end users, looking at the data, see the data tells you a story, how much they're engaging, which of those people, whether it's the 50% of the audience or 80%, whatever it might be, actually engaging, look at what they're looking at, understand the trends, and keep optimizing your content offering and making it better based on where you see people engaging. Because when those end users engage and they get better, you've got a business case when that comes up for renewal that, hey, there's a reason to keep us in here.
Well, on the flip side of that, you touched on it, is the power of data on so many levels. There might be a brand new course that you just invested a lot in and throw out there, and all of a sudden, for some reason, the data shows you that right around that 2 minute mark, everybody's crapping out. But in all the other courses you've done, they take it all the way through. So what's going on there, right? You want to drill down further, and you want to look at that further, and then maybe do some A/B testing, and then check the data, because the data tells us not only when people are engaging, but when they're checking out. It's up to us to determine, well, what's happening at that time point that's disengaging to them.
Yeah, 100%. It's not black and white. And I I think it's easy to think, "Hey, I produced a library of content, I deliver it to a customer, they roll it out to, 5,000 employees, and then you don't look at it again." But it's always an iterative process. You're gonna keep looking at the data, see what's working and what's not, and then that's the beauty, like, again, you said in the beginning, how's the technology changed? What's better today than it was when we got started 15 years ago? It is the fact that digital media is very easy to update. When we used to, when we first got started, it was CD-ROM training. So like you send out 5,000 CD-ROM discs, you can't iterate on that. You can't make it better when you see that data telling you something. And that's the beauty of it today. I love that aspect that you can quickly just go and optimize a piece of content, add something based on the feedback you're getting. And even within, a certain engagement, you can keep optimizing and making your content better based on that data. And I think that's a big light bulb for a lot of people now that you can actually do that.
Got it. And that holds true in the book world as well, right? By the time a book is shipped, it's done versus an ongoing conversation vis-a-vis a blog or something like that that you have with your audience. So what are the things that I should be thinking about before I sort of dive into this?
So I think it's really everyone comes at it from a different perspective, and like your audience, you said is different roles. They're all thought leaders, but some are primarily speakers on stage. Some are primarily authors. Others are training companies, and I've noticed more and more that where you come at it from, where your primary interest is, whether it's writing books or being a professional speaker, does have an impact on how you design your content, how you go into this. And I think job one is outlining how your online component, your on demand, because we don't do live, everything we do is on demand online component can build on top of what you do every day, whether it's authoring books or speaking, and then really build we do a lot of mind mapping in the beginning with people to kind of work that out. But I think job one is to figure out how it fits into your overall knowledge product space, because everybody's a little bit different.
No, and I think that's a great point. I love what you said in terms of where your starting point is impacts how you play, right? So if I'm a speaker, I know that I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to get on stage, but sometimes there's a weird vibe, and I can pick that up and pivot in the moment, right? The temperature in the room is bad, or the company just made a bad announcement, or something affecting impacting compensation before I came out, and I can pick that up and say, oh, okay, I'm going to pivot that, right? In this world, that's not the case. So you can't rely on sort of those vibes and those muscles and that improv there. I want to touch on one other sort of point here is the power of sustainability, right? So again, if we go back to what is the buyer, again, going back to the CLO and all those sort of folks, what are they looking for? They're looking to sustain that knowledge transfer and change. Can you talk about sort of how you're using digital and tools to sustain the learning so we don't get those spikes and crashes that we're prone to?
Yeah, so I think what has worked really well for us now is this assessment model, which is basically saying that, okay, every quarter you're going to take the same assessment. And to your point, sustainability is really important because the novelty wears off. People come in when you do these initial launches, they roll out your content, they do a lot of marketing promotion to their employee base, and you get that great spike in the beginning, everyone feels great. Then they forget to come back because you're competing online with a lot more fun stuff than training in a lot of cases. And
And
so
life.
right? And
Yeah.
so what I like now is this idea, and this is where we've gotten into the skills-based aspect of it, is saying, okay, well, let's have a timed assessment once a quarter, twice a year, annually, whatever it might be, so that people are reminded to come back and that there's a purpose to why they're doing it. And that if I do an assessment, it says, okay, you're weak in these two areas and strong in these three, and here's some recommended content, it reminds them that, hey, I'm on a learning path. A lot of this is, and because you're a true educator, but a lot of people aren't, and you forget that there's got to be a curriculum. There's got to be an overarching curriculum with a start and an end
Yep.
and a goal. And it's not just, hey, go watch a bunch of cool videos when we first tell you about it and then forget about it. And everybody leans on email notifications are nice, But
Yeah, but they're pretty passive. But I mean, the other thing I would say about what you just touched on with assessments is we're living in a world. I mean, just think about the learner and what their days are like and what they're doing, right? So they're Fitbitting themselves to death. They know when they get on the treadmill how quickly they do a 5K and what their routine is. They know what their calories are and what foods they've eaten and what percentages are carb because they've got that app, right? They know how well they've slept because they've got that app. And we need that feedback. We want that feedback. And they're getting it in so many other domains in their life where if you just, quote, teach me something and don't test me and show me that I'm improving or this is where I should focus on, today I'm going to go to the gym and work on legs and tomorrow it'll be arm, whatever, you're not connecting at the same level that folks are really, really accustomed to in any sort of behavioral change element they're going on in any domain in their life.
yeah, it's exactly right. And like I always think, I'm not a fan of the term gamification, but game theory comes into play with all of those devices and things like like
Or just
on
call
your
it psychology so you don't get hung up on the word, right?
you're
Because
right.
yeah, I mean it's human nature to if I put effort into something, I want to know is that working?
Yeah, and it's and you're the devices that we have at our fingertips today are so good at that that like yeah, I have my Garmin watch on. I know how many workouts I got in this week. I know if I'm falling a little bit behind or I'm on track, and I'm not really looking like how I compare to other people. I don't really care about that, but I do care that hey, I've set a personal benchmark for what I want to get in each week, and why would we not do the same thing with learning? If you're not going to keep coming back if you've forgotten what the purpose of that training curriculum was in the first place.
Exactly, because again, to your point, using the workout analogy, when I go to do a workout, I'm either I'm trying to build strength, I'm trying to burn like what. There's a reason I'm there. There's lots of other things I'd rather do than be on a treadmill, but there's a reason. We often in the corporate world forget why am I taking this? Am I taking this because my boss told me, or it's sort of a compliance thing, or like am I actually taking this to learn something that I can apply and be better at the job that I'm paid to do? Like that's a whole different mind shift.
Yeah, and ultimately when, nowadays, and you're also dealing with a new generation of employees and a new style of learning, and they need to know why they're learning this. It's not just, hey, learn it because this is the path we've set up 5 years ago for everyone, but it's, hey, I want to know why I'm learning it and I want to know what the end game is, why I'm doing it and what I'm going to be at the end. And yeah, if we could all have a Fitbit, for knowledge on our wrist, that'd be really cool. We're not probably quite there yet with knowledge, but that's the idea of what you're trying to create when you're bringing your content library to a big company because ultimately the employees retain better, they become better contributors for the company, and you've done your job by helping them achieve that.
Well, as we start to wrap up here, John, lots and lots of information going back and forth here. And any final tips or thoughts for someone that's on the edge or experimenting with maybe the size of the market, why they would be crazy not to? Any sort of final Johnisms, words of wisdom?
I would just say to everyone, if you are a thought leader, you are a knowledge expert in some space, and you're doing it in one form or another, whether it's on stage, in writing, or what have you. I just always say to everyone, just start producing content. You start producing content, even if you're not planning to put it out there and package it and deliver it. But it's the best thing in the world to do is just to start like working that muscle. Like you said, congrats, by the way, your 100th episode of your podcast show, which is super cool. And like, it's like that, when you started on episode one, you didn't know that you were going to be a 100 episode podcast host. But now the muscle's built, you do it all the time. It's just part of your system. And I think creating online content for learning, you've got to just exercise that same muscle, even though it's not going to be your best content in the beginning. It gets you thinking about that, like all the different ways you could add to your knowledge product suite. And it starts by just creating content in one form or another in the beginning, just to get that model going.
So just do it then. Cool. Well, thanks, John. I appreciate all that you've shared with us today. Lots to learn from an expert that's been there for a long, long, long time and continuing to evolve and stay cutting art and giving the market more of what they want and the way they want it. So thanks so much today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com.
To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.